Okay. So Emily, I guess you can handle the CES section and Sue-Ann can do the GHG. I think we still have a slide here on GHG, but
You do.
I can't.
There's one at the end. Did you want me to do the like at the beginning when you have the what's new, the CES-E slide, or do you want to do that one?
Yeah, why don't you handle that too? I'll introduce it.
Okay. I mean, I don't mind having you go through it if you want, if it works better with the flow of things.
But whatever you want, it doesn't matter, I guess.
It doesn't.
We'll wait a couple of minutes for those attending. I hope you can hear me. Can you see that when I pull up a panel on the screen?
I don't see anything.
Okay. It's 11. We'll wait one more minute to start this webinar. Okay, we'll just get started. This is a compliance filing webinar for Massachusetts RPS, APS, CPS, and CES, as well as filling out a greenhouse gas emissions form for the 2021 compliance year. I'm John Wassam. I'm the RPS and APS program manager with DOER. I also have Emily Lamb from MassDEP and Sue-Ann Richardson from MassDEP as well. The beginning, we'll just briefly go over the compliance filing process. We sent out available bank certificates from 2019 and 2020 in early May. 2019 has to be used for 2021 compliance. Otherwise, they will expire. 2020 bank certificates can be used for 2021 or 2022. We sent out the retail load obligation to all other LSEs in mid-May. You have to use the load obligation we sent out as the load for calculation of the compliance. Unless you have issues with that, you have to get a hold of me immediately if you have some differences. But generally, what is provided by the electric distribution companies to DOER is what is required to be used as the compliance load. The compliance workbook and instructions are now posted on the DOER website for your information. Reminder that the end of the 2021 trading year is at midnight on June 15th. So all generation certificates, renewable generation certificates, should be in your Massachusetts sub-account by that time. The ACPs for this year for RPS, APS, and CPS should be submitted to MassCEC, or the fund should be wired to MassCEC by Wednesday, June 29th, so that they can return a signed receipt to you, which you would include with your filing. As a reminder, ACPs for CES, Clean Energy Standard, and Clean Energy Standard E, existing, must be submitted to MassDEP within 30 days of a separate invoice that they send out after the filing. So a different process for CES. The compliance filing is due no later than close of business on Friday, July 1st. And filers should provide an electronic copy of the filing, their GIS settlement report, a CPEC settlement report, which is a different report because CPECs are handled differently, and the ACP receipt for MassCEC if you had one. If you do not require a receipt, nothing is required in that regard. And everything should be sent to doer.rps@mass.gov. What's new this year is the Clean Energy Standard for existing. And Emily, do you want to describe it in case there are any questions regarding this?
I can go through this quickly. So yeah, as John said, this is the first year that the CES-E requirement is in effect. So these are separate certificates specific to the CES-E. If you want more details about like which generators can make these certificates, it's all listed out in our FAQ on our website. So you can see more details about that there. The minimum standard for this compliance year is 20%. And as I said, these must be CES-E certificates. You can't use CES certificates or RPS Class 1 certificates. There's an ACP option, just as with the CES. It's set at $6 per megawatt hour this year, 10% of the RPS Class 1. And as John mentioned, you pay that. That will also be paid separately from what you pay to MassCEC. So we'll send you an invoice if you need to pay that based on the workbook that you submit. There is no banking in the CES-E, so you cannot bank certificates going forward. And there is a provision for exempt load prior to October 4th, 2019, and you'll fill that out in the workbook. That's where you'll let us know about any exempt load that we need to take into consideration.
Thank you, Emily. What's new continued? This is the first year that you can use bank certificates for compliance with the clean energy standard. So banking was allowed in 2019 and 2020, and whatever you had banked for CES can now be used for compliance for 2021 and going forward. Reminders, some of this is a carryover from last year. Just that a notarization is no longer required on the authorization form. It's not necessary to send a hard copy to DOER any longer. You can just email it. An e-signature is acceptable on where it's required to be signed, which is the certification and the authorization forms, and we'll go through that after we get through this, the webinar presentation or the PowerPoint presentation. And the alternative would be to have the certification and authorization forms. You print them out, sign them, scan them, and save it as a PDF and email with the filing. So same as last year, and the important is no hard copy is required to be sent. As far as bank certificates, they are, again, this year, nothing has changed in this regard in what the amounts are. Bank certificates can be used in any of the 2 subsequent compliance years, except for Clean Peak standards, whose regulations currently allow that they could be used for the following 3 years. And some people did bank some Clean Peak certificates last year. So these are the amounts. And we noted in CES that the obligation is in excess of the RPS Class 1 obligation. That is the net what we call the net CES obligation, not on the entire obligation of 22% this year. And as we noted, CES-E has 0 banking. As I said, make sure that all certificates are settled in your Massachusetts sub-account by June 15th. That would include any SREC and SREC 2 remitted certificates. These are ones that you would have acquired through the auction process. And if you are using them for compliance, please be sure to move those to your sub-account. But it's important to note that if you have auction certificates that you do not plan to use, please leave them in your general account. I don't think you can move them to your bank. I think the bank account at GIS goes away at the end of the 4th quarter. So you should just leave them in the general account. Because once you settle them, then we consider them retired. If you intend to bank certificates, you would also settle any of those classes that you intend to bank. So suppose you had 100 certificates that met the obligation and you wanted to bank 30, you would have to settle the 130 certificates. We also ask you for any green that you are doing, you would also settle any of those certificates that are meeting certain green standards that are over and above the minimum obligation that is required to be settled. As I mentioned before, there are 2 separate GIS reports. There's a general one is called my settled certificates disposition. That includes everything except Clean Peak Standard. Clean Peak Standard comes out on a different report. So if you have certificates, make sure you include that report as well. And these reports all should be in CSV format only. For the solar carve-out, any auction remitted SRECs must be used for 2021 compliance. From 2019, 2020 are like bank, they can be used for the next 2 years if so chosen. And the same with SREC 2s, 2019 auction certificates should be used this year, otherwise they will expire, and 2020 can be used for the next 2 years. And as I said, any SRECs that auction certificates that you're holding should remain in your GIS account. This table is, well, the last important two is remitted certificates should be included in the settled certificates. They should not be considered bank certificates. That's a separate listing, and we'll go through the workbook to show where that is. Again, solar carve-out, no change. There was an exemption before 628.13. There was minimal reported. That should be going close to zero now that it's 8 years after the exemption. It has a lower minimum standard than all contracts after 628.13 of 1.6629. Again, there's 3 levels for solar carve-out 2, because before 425.14, the minimum standard on that is 0%. If the supply contracts were executed or extended on or after 4/25/2014, but before 5/8/2016, they have exempt load that's less than the marginal minimum standard. And then for any contracts after 5/8/2016 has a slight, I believe that's a slightly higher minimum standard this year than it was last year, approximately 3.9%. There will be SREC auctions again held this year before the end of July. Again, well, DOAR does not expect to have significant auction volumes. I believe the market is rather tight, according to our calculations. And all deposits in the auction account must be made by June 15th, the end of trading. Bidders, again, will need to register by submitting a qualification form to DOER's auction agent, which is ENO, E-N-E-L, ENO. And again, suppliers can use the auction to manage their supply of SRECs. Quickly go through again the ACP payments. This is only for RPS, APS, and CPS. Payments, as I said, should be made to MassDEP by Wednesday, June 29th. We will send out separate wire instructions. MassDEP likes to send them out encrypted, so it will be coming from them, and that should be, I don't know if it'll be this week, but hopefully by the end of next week, those will be sent out. Also, remember, once you wire the money to MassDEP, you should also email a copy of your tab N to MassDEP. That is what they sign and send back to you as the receipt. And we'll show this on the workbook. And the ACP receipt, if you have one, must be included as part of your filing. If you have not received the ACP receipt, however, you should not delay the email submission of your compliance filing. Emily, again, you want to?
Yeah, so as in previous years, your RPS Class 1 recs will be counted towards your CES requirement. And then there is no longer load exemptions for 2021. Those have all run out. And then, as we've mentioned before, the ACP funds need to be paid separately from your RPS ACP. And you'll see in the workbook that the amount is calculated separately. And we will send you an invoice sometime in July after we've reviewed your workbook, telling you what to pay and giving you instructions about how to pay that. And payment needs to be made within 30 days of receiving that invoice. We send them via email and a hard copy.
And Sue Ann, this is what we have for GHG reporting.
Yes. So the GHG tab of your compliance workbook is a mandatory report. Please don't forget to fill it out. The second report for the 2021 compliance year will not be due until September 15th of 2023. If you have any questions on either of these reports or how to fill them out, please send me an email. The email address is listed. You can leave a voicemail also, but email is preferable, particularly if you are not in the US. Thanks.
Thank you, Sue Ann. And these are the contacts for the compliance filing, if it's RPS, APS, CPS, and just the overall questions, you can send them to doer.rps@mass.gov. If it's CES and CES-E and anything to do with the ACP with MassDEP, contacts climate.strategies@mass.gov. And for GHG reporting questions, as Sue Ann said, please use her email address. If you do have questions on CEC ACP payment information, they would like that to be sent to finance@masscec.com. And I think that's, let's see, I think that's it on that. And now, whoops. Bear with me, I'm sorry. Can you now see that? With this, now I brought up the compliance workbook. We can go through that quickly. The first page is just the filer information. It's important to put in the legal name of the retail electricity supplier here. That is carried forward to the other pages. The contact person is the primary person that we would contact regarding the filing. Is that if there's an additional backup contact person, they would be here. The authorized representative is generally an officer of the company that can sign on behalf and attest to the accuracy of the filing workbook. And they would also be the signer on the authorization and certification pages. So important information there. In prelim, nothing's changed really. We still, if you file by sub-account, you should list them here. And then the load is put here. The load, at least at the bottom, should equal the amount that DOER sent out to you for your obligation. Most filers only have one account, and that number should be equal to the load obligation here. And again, this number is carried throughout the workbook once you enter it. These are optional tables for disposition of SRECs. They were built to help people keep straight how they were handling accounts. So the total amount of SRECs that you had would be here. If you transferred any into the clearinghouse auction or you settled them in your reserve account, you would put those here. So these are not just the settled accounts. These are all at the top level. A is whatever SRECs you had in your possession at GIS. So then you might have settled in reserve. You might submit some to the auction account. Any errant certificates would be applied there. Then we have what's available for compliance or what's not available for compliance, and then what's available for compliance. So, and again, this is, and then you would mark here how many you did apply for class 1 for solar carve-out compliance. The next one is for if you happen to apply any for class 1 compliance, because they do act as class 1 certificates as well. And the same, this table is exactly the same for SREC 2. So nothing really changed, but these are optional tables. You do not have to fill these out. They were just built for convenience to keeping track of the SRECs. The next is for the class 1 exempt. This would be your total load in column C, as it's column C here, column D in the Excel workbook. That would be carried over from the prior prelim page, or any sub-account would be listed here. Total number of contracts before 1/1/2019 would be listed here, and the megawatt hours associated with any exempt load would be here. And then column F here, this F would calculate the net obligation for contracts after, on or after 1/1/2019. So that's how you handle the exempt. Then we do ask, if you keep going down, we do ask for annual projections. These are projections only. We don't, use your best effort. We use it for estimation purposes for future years of how the exempt load might change in the future. So all the exempt load pages are built the same. So there's only one exemption here for solar carve-out, and again, you would enter the exempt load here, calculates the net load over there, and again, it has a projection down below of exempt load. Solar carve-out 2 is the same, except there were 2 tiers. So you do have, this is the first exemption before 425.14. And then this is the second exemption here, 8, where it's between 425.14 and 5/8/2016. And again, a projection down below. CPS has an exemption before 1/1/2020. And there is the exemption for CES-E that we talked about before 10/4/2019. So same, so I believe the projection ends next year. That's why it's the projection is truncated for CES-E. Tab 4, you would enter any errant certificates. These might be certificates that got settled into the wrong account. You've made arrangements with DOER. We understand what the issues are. If they got, one year we had somebody settle certificates in a Connecticut account. So GIS cannot move them, but we honored them. So they were APS certificates or AIC, so they couldn't be used in Connecticut anyway, but that occurred 1 year. So those are the types of examples of what constitutes an errant certificate. And then these get carried forward to the bottom of the tabs here, but you still have to re-enter them in the tab. So you can see here, this is a carry forward from page 4, but you still have to re-enter what the errant certificates are on these lines. So, and the pages are all basically built the same. Your exempt load would be carried forward here. This would be the total, this would be the what's exempt, and this line would be the net total. In the first column, you enter the GIS RPS class 1 certificates, not including, hopefully, SRACs or SRAC 2s. You would enter the certificates here. You'd enter the errant certificates in column G here. The next 2 columns are for your bank certificates. If you're using 2019, enter in here, 2020, enter in there. And then it goes through, the green is all part of the calculation. It figures out what the total obligation here, this becomes the calculation of what's for the prior year. So if you have exempt load, it's only increasing by 1% per year. It was 15% last year, it's 16% this year, but the class 2 standard is increasing by 2% per year for contracts after 1/1/2019. That's why there's a jump between these two. I hope that's not too difficult to understand, but that's what happens here. We get a total for these 2 obligations, and then in this column O, we subtract out what the obligations are for solar Carve-Out 1 and 2. So you really have to fill out solar Carve-Out. It might be best fill out the Carve-Out 6 and 7 first, so that when you come back here, you see what your net obligation is for RPS class 1. And then we calculate the banking limit of 30. There is a limit here, so if you had extra, it's calculated there. And then we carry that forward next year for you. So all the other sheets are basically the same. They take into account the different exemptions. Like SCO 2 has the 2 different tiers. So it's calculated here. And it's this number here that gets the obligation here in O gets subtracted out back here in column when we calculate the net RPS Class 1. These are all similar, waste to energy. Just to note, it has gone up to 3.7% this year. I believe it was 3.5% last year. So just make note of that. APS, nothing changed. CPS, nothing changed. There was no banking. That's why this column is blanked out for 2019. But if you had 2020 bank certificates, you can enter them here. Just a note on Clean Peak Standard. I don't know if everybody knew that there were two errors. One was there was an overissuance of 9,000 Clean Peak certificates. They have been retired by GIS. However, they still show up in the issuance report that we see. But there's also about 20,000, approximately 22,000 that were added to the CPAC count. So the total CPAC availability is around 60,000 at the moment. Still short of the obligation, but they were added and they are available in as certificates in GIS. Clean energy, same song and dance still. There's no exempt load any longer, but there is exempt load. CES, obviously, there's no banking, so we have blocked all this out. We did keep the totals here just in case somebody inadvertently issued excess CES-E. We wanted to keep track of that. So these should remain zero. If you see a positive here, you might reconsider what's happening in your system, but these should be zeros. And then I'll let Sue Ann talk about the greenhouse gas page.
Okay.
If she wants to go through it, or
Sure.
I can point to where you want me to point.
We're just talking about the blue boxes. So
Okay.
again, this is a mandatory report. It's somewhat different from the other pages. Please don't forget it. You will use your GIS settled certificate report to fill in this tab. You will not need the CPS report. No CPS certificates here. To fill out this tab, you can just use the filter button on your GIS report. APS certificates are not eligible. Most of them do not generate electricity. They are steam or CHP. They are not to go in this report, with the exception of fuel cell certificates. You can use fuel cell certificates. Please put them in column I. You do not need to worry about the columns for SREX 1 or 2 because they are also RPS class 1. So, and CES certificates will also be class 1. You don't need to worry about that column. What you do need to worry about, again, is APS fuel cell only. You need to filter on CES-E. You also need to include RPS class 2 waste to energy, RPS class 2 renewable, and RPS class 1. There's an odd exception in that sometimes solar thermal certificates show up in class 1. Do not include those. There are notes under further down on this tab somewhere. Please read them. They should give you some basic instructions. Don't include solar thermal, don't include APS except for fuel cell. If you have any questions, let me know. I will answer. I think that's it.
Okay, yeah, there are more calculations of where
Yeah,
numbers
the
are
commissions
coming
will
from.
calculate themselves. You don't need to fill in anything in the green boxes or the gray boxes, just the blue.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thank you, Sue. The green, what you report here is if you're fulfilling green requirements, what you should report here is only over and above your obligation amount too. So if it's 100%, if it's 100% green, you would back out the net obligation for RPS class 1. These are only class 1 certificates, and you would enter the additional amount here. We do not, in this column, we do not want you to include any reserve certificates that you use for green. These are only certificates that you have settled in your GIS Massachusetts subaccount, and are using, part of them would be go for compliance and the rest is for the marketing claim. So we handle the reserve. The reserve certificates are accounted for separately and should not be included here. The ACPs come over here. So if you have any ACP, this is all just rolled forward, and it will tell you how much you owe to each if there are any ACP. This is all a calculated form. You do not have to enter anything here. The top one, 16A, is for RPS, APS, and CPS standards. That is what you would pay. This amount here, this total, is what you would wire to MassDEP. 16B includes the clean energy standard and the clean energy standard for existing generation. Those amounts would be calculated here. This sum you would not have to pay immediately. You would wait for the invoice from MassDEP to be sent to you, and then they would provide instructions for you to return that amount to MassDEP. So that's why the separations are here. These go to MassDEP, these go to MassDEP. The certification form, there are two separate sections because of clean energy standard and for RPS, APS, and CES. So the authorized representative, this is where they would sign an e-signature is fine, again, or print this page out, sign it, copy it, or scan it as a PDF, and you can return it with your filing. And then again, that person, well, there are two different statements here for the authorized representative to sign. So they actually have to sign in 3 different places. This one is for the clean energy standard. I think we fixed the printout. I think if you print the page, it should encapsulate. Everything should appear on one page. Last year we had spillover and there was a little confusion, but I think it should be fixed this year. The authorization page is a little confusing. The important thing is to put in this box, on what basis is the person signing, by what basis does that person have authority to sign? Usually you would just say, I'm the vice president of the company, or I'm the CFO, I'm the president of the country. Just something to indicate why that person has authority to act as the authorized representative. That's what we're looking for here. And then again, they would sign it here, or whoever's signing on behalf of that person would put it here. tab in. This is what you would do when you wire money. You would print this page out and email it to finance at, I think I had it somewhere here. Yes, finance@masscec.com. This is what you send to them. And then they would sign it here and return it to you. And then you would include this receipt that they sent to you with your filing to show that the money had been wired over to MassCEC. So this refers only to the RPS, APS, and CPS only. And this amount corresponds to this amount here. That's where they're tracking from. So that's, and then the last is just contacts where you can reach us if you have questions. Let's see if I can do this. I'm pretty, should D37, I think I took care of this. Somebody had problems back on the prelim page. I've posted a revised version 1.1 to the website, which hopefully you will use that version. I unlocked this page I did not protect this page, so the cells should work now. So hopefully, or somebody tries it out, you can get back to me if it's not working. But I did not protect this sheet. Nothing here really needs to be protected at this time. Are there other? Oh, and I answered that live. So I've done that one. Are there any other questions that anybody has? We've turned off the chat for this webinar, so I cannot see questions through that means. But if you have questions, nobody else? I don't see any questions coming forward. Obviously, you can reach out to us via our email if you have questions once you start going through the workbook. So I'm going to stop sharing for the moment. Okay. Then I think that concludes our presentation for this webinar. Good luck. July 1st, I believe, is a Friday, so be ahead of a long weekend. All right. Thank you very much. Thank you to my participants, and good luck, I guess. Bye.